Before we continue with today's session, it is so important that we do an acknowledgement of traditional lands. Royal Roads University acknowledges that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Cosapsum, Esquimalt, and Lekwungen Songhees ancestors and families. It is with gratitude that we now learn and work here where the past, the present, and the future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. Welcome. So today's presentation is brought to you by the School of Communication and Culture here at Royal Roads University, in particular, the Learning and Technology side of that school. So here are a few of our programs in case you are interested in diving deeper. We have a Master of Arts in Learning and Technology. We have a Graduate Diploma in Learning and Technology, a Graduate Diploma in Technology Enhanced Learning and Design, and a Graduate Certificate in Instructional Design. So if you're interested in any of these things, Ariana's going to pop a link in the chat. Feel welcome to dive deeper into them, or you can always reach out. You can even respond to any emails that we send out to you if you're wanting to explore these programs further. So today's session, just to make sure everybody's in the right room, we're going to be talking about online burnout, online burnout, strategies for curiosity and connection. We're going to be looking at innovative ways to move past online learning, burnout, and create engaging, connected online spaces. And of course, doing that in an online space right now. So I'm so pleased to introduce and welcome our amazing panel. I'm going to let everybody on the panel introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Brenna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brenna Clarke Gray, and I'm joining you from an absolutely glorious, sunny, blue sky day here in Tk'emlúps-te-Secwepemc territory. I work at Thompson Rivers University, where I am the coordinator of educational technologies. And I'm just looking out my office window. I get this amazing view of Mount Peter and Mount Paul out of my window. So I kind of want to just let you see this instead of my face today. Before I became a coordinator of educational technologies, I was a faculty member at Douglas College in the Lower Mainland for 9 years in the English department there. So that's my path into technology and teaching is from the faculty side.
Thank you so much, Brenna. And now I'd love to welcome Sandra to do an introduction.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I was happy to have the invitation to participate because I actually just graduated from the Masters of Arts Learning and Technology program, which was phenomenal. And I've learned so much and come away with so much that that's why I'm happy to give back this way. So my background is in teaching, although I've had other careers along the way. Teaching is my most recent career. So for the last 15 years, I've been in public education, K to 12, but mostly 8 to 12. My focus has been with at-risk learners. And currently my role is a district mentor inclusion teacher in a school district about 45 minutes outside of Vancouver, BC. I also spent some time as a distributed learning teacher for a grade 8 to 12 online school. So my background is kind of varied, but comes from the teaching point of view and also from the point of view that I just finished this great program and happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction. And Corie.
Hey, everybody. My name is Corie Houldsworth. I am currently working as a management system officer for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which doesn't sound like it has anything to do with this at all, but it does. I'm a current Mallet student, actually. I am scheduled, hopefully, to graduate next year. And my background is actually in trades training. And so I'm a radiation expert, and I have dealt with trades and certification training for radiation users all across Canada and internationally as well. And with the Nuclear Safety Commission now, we deal with quality management systems and training programs, for example, for nuclear power plant workers, both training and certification, as well as the management of those programs. So that's my connection to the learning aspect of things too. Very happy to be here. I'm in Southern Alberta, and it's nice and sunny today, if a little bit on the cool side.
Thank you. Awesome. And now I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Childs, who is the program head of the Learning and Technology program at Royal Roads. And I'm going to welcome you up, and I'm going to spotlight all the panelists, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Super. Thanks so much, Amara. And thank you all, both the panelists and everyone who's joined. This is so exciting to have such a lovely group for the conversation. I'm Elizabeth Childs. I work at Royal Roads in the School of Education and Technology, which is where the master's program and the diplomas and certificates reside around learning and technology. And my background is in, this is going to sound very vintage now, online and blended learning. So I worked for many, many years as a consultant coming out of the K-12 system decades ago now, and then worked for many years consulting around how do you navigate the blend between online and face-to-face. And then have moved into a faculty role in my current position at Royal Roads. We've been involved in learning and technology at Royal Roads since 1999. So the predecessor to the Mallet program was a master's in distributed learning. So lots of terms and lots of space in this field. But one thing that's consistent, and this even was before the pandemic, was how do you engage learners in these virtual spaces, and how do you build both their intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but also help them navigate the boundaries, because we know, and we know more now, about the physiological aspects of staring at a screen and being seated all day if you're not at a stand-up or move around desk. And we also know a lot more about the neuroscience of learning and just as a human condition, what it is like to be in this space. So I'm really thrilled to welcome our panelists. I'm so honored that you are able to make time for this in your day. And I'm going to jump right into our questions, because I know everyone who's joined really wants to know, okay, what's the secret? What's the one thing I need to do? And I don't know that it's quite that easy, but we'll see. So one of the ones that I think comes up often, and it comes off in many different sectors, is how do you know, either personally or professionally, if you're working with a group, what are the symptoms of online burnout and fatigue? What does that look like? How does it manifest yourself? If you're doing corporate training, how can you recognize that? If you're working in higher ed or in K-12, what does that look like with your learners or your colleagues? So I'm wondering if maybe, Sandra, do you want to get us started?
Sure.
Talking about that question?
You bet. So we had a chance as panelists to think about this beforehand, and I think that's important because we had to kind of really dive into what we noticed and what we could share with y'all. So for me, I have some top kind of signals for myself, but I also kind of tend to look for these in my learners that I'm working with. And my number one is procrastination. So when I start to really procrastinate, I know that something's off. So, because typically, you know, I get in a good rhythm, but when I start noticing that whole rhythm of guilt and anxiety and having to get work done, guilt and anxiety, that procrastination piece comes in, and then I know, hey, something's happening. And that kind of feeds into sort of a second symptom I notice in myself. And this one seems slightly counterintuitive, but the busier I am and the more I am overloaded and getting burnt out with my online world, I seem to consume more media. So my television hours go up, my hours on social media go up. And I think it's has to do with needing an escape. So when I'm not busy, when I have lots of free time, I watch less TV, I'm on social media less. And it seems odd, but it's true for me. So if I notice that in the evenings, the first thing I'm doing is just going to sit down and watch TV, something has to change, because it means I'm trying to turn my brain off. And so then I recognize, okay, what's happening? You're watching a ton of Outlander this week. Maybe it's time to switch things up. So, and another piece that I notice is if I'm getting no joy, and I'm pretty apathetic about the tasks I'm doing. I mean, I got into the field of teaching because I love it. So if I'm starting to notice that things are feeling joyless, or if I'm noticing my students aren't showing any sort of enthusiasm, like they're all just like, I know it's time to take a step back and kind of evaluate where we're at or where I'm at, and kind of make changes from there. So those are my signs that I look for. And yeah, that's for me.
Thanks for that. I think, you know, it's important to just get this out. And we talked about when we met, like, let's just put this out in the open first so that then we can talk about some of the strategies and innovations. So Corie, how about you? Because I'm sure there are some who are part of this today going, a radiation specialist at the federal level? Huh. Okay, I'm curious. So in your work, and both, you know, as you've been learning online, but also as you work to build this in your sector, what do you look for? What kind of telltale signs are there?
For me, the Nuclear Safety Commission, the agency that I work for, has gone 100% online. We're not expected to be in the office to any degree, unlike some of the other federal government agencies who are, you know, saying 2 or 3 days a week or whatever. There's been a consistent message from my employer that we are not expected to go to the office, although we can if we want to. So for me, that has meant, like Sandra said, a lot of screen time. And I do the same thing. I tend to become, if I'm getting burnt out, I tend to become frozen. And there's some doom scrolling, you know, that kind of thing as well. There's lots to doom scroll these days, as we all know as well. I do get to that sort of frozen point where I can't get going on anything either. I feel like I have no attention span. I can see Bettina there. If hopefully I've pronounced your name right. Yeah. Okay, good. I have no attention span. I have no focus. I just can't get going on anything. And I don't have that same passion, like you were saying, Sandra. I don't have a vision. I don't have, and Elizabeth, you had mentioned this when we first started the Mallet program. I don't have any more ideas of things I want to research in the future. I've lost inspiration. I've lost ideas. I've lost that thread of, hey, oh yeah, that would be really cool to do as a research project. If I'm having none of those thoughts, I know it's time to peel something back and to say no to something. And we'll talk about strategies, I think, later. But it's when I get to that point, okay, I got to do something at this point too. So do we want to answer questions in the chat now, or do we want to?
Sure. I mean, why don't you just take a minute and we will come back to it, but maybe just jump in because Bettina has raised a really important question that is being raised by many people globally.
Yeah, actually, and it's funny, not funny, haha, but funny, ironic. My partner and I were just talking about this morning too. How do we establish those boundaries? Because we both work from home now, pretty much 100% of the time. Part of it is having a dedicated space, which we are really fortunate to be able to have. We're really privileged to be able to have here. I know not everybody is, but we both have our own spaces where we can close the door at the end of the day and make it go away. That helps a lot. We were actually talking about the neuroscience of it as well too, with if you have a ritual around it, you can close the door and it says to your brain, okay, we're done. We're going to go do something else now. And it tends for me to have to be something physical. Yesterday afternoon, for example, I was out hauling rocks in my front yard to build a new patio. Like, it has to be a total change because it has to not be stuck in this virtual land anymore.
And it's funny, Court, because I'm sort of the opposite. My balance between working 100% online and family is I have this open door policy where my office is just this space that anyone can be in, that the dog comes in, the cat comes in, people come and eat in here. And so it's interesting to see that we kind of have this opposite strategy, which is great. I think it's wonderful. The more strategies we can think about, the better. But it was just really interesting to me because I thought about that. I'm like, yeah, I guess that would work too. But for my balance, it's total opposite.
Brenna, how about you? What are you seeing both for yourself, but also, you know, at Thompson Rivers? Because there's a deep history of open online at Thompson Rivers. So this is not new. And we've talked a little bit as a panelist, you know, many of these strategies pre-pandemic were things that you would get in the beginning of your distance learning course, right? Set up your own personal workspace, try to keep it separate, try to have particular times that you use it, you know. So we're pulling some of these forward, but what do you see, Brenna?
I always know that burnout is in the offing for myself personally when I can't. I always describe it as an inability to access patience, because my life, my day working life is largely technical support for faculty as well as pedagogical support. It's work that requires a tremendous amount of patience. And then I go home where I have a 5-year-old and a cat who eats things. And I also require a tremendous amount of patience in that space. And so for me, my first sign that things are getting too intense, like I know getting towards burnout, is that I can't access that patience anymore. And I see it in my campus community as well. So part of the work that I do is that I answer our learning management support tickets, not just me. I have a wonderful team. We answer learning management support tickets at the university, and we have office hours, and we have a lot of office hours, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. So we are present with the community a lot, which means we are often the only face of the community to absorb anxiety, tension, frustration. And that was especially true during the fully online period, which here at TRU lasted from the start of the pandemic until last September. So through that entire period, we were often the only kind of like representatives of the university that people engaged with. And so I feel like I always have a really good temperature of campus and that understanding how people are coping with frustration and whether or not they are able to access patience themselves, like not on the micro level, because of course everybody's different, but kind of on the macro campus level, like, help desk was a bit spicy today. I think people are pretty stressed out. It's usually a good sense. I find that personally, I also, when sort of on the verge of burnout, I become hypercritical of myself. So I find it very, very difficult to assess whether the work I'm doing is good or not in periods of high stress and burnout. And I think both Corie and Sandra kind of touched on this idea, but I will find that I go into a mode that I describe as like overwork and yet nothing's getting done. So I'm either task switching really fast because I'm trying to find something that I feel like I can accomplish and do well. Or for me, I make a lot of podcasts and do a lot of audio editing. And so the time it takes to edit an episode of a podcast gets longer and longer and longer and longer. The podcast stays the same length though. So for me, those are signs. And it's also, when I see that in other people, and particularly through the great conduit of offering faculty support, I kind of get a sense of what the campus rhythm around burnout is as well.
Absolutely. And I think, those points are really consistent. That I love that inability to access patience. That's a beautiful way to phrase it. And also that the notion of the hypercriticality of your work, for some, it's the inability to make decisions, right? So when I see it with students, what it comes back as from an instructor's point of view is many, 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 many questions about an assignment. Because really that decision point of being able to be comfortable to go out and put something forward on your own or research on your own, the resources aren't there, right? There's not enough gas in the tank. And so it comes out as a lot of questions, or where I see it come out as a lot of to-dos, right? So, and even in myself, I know when I'm getting to that point of, okay, we need to take a little body break or, get out there and do something totally different, very creative, is when my to-do list is just one more to-do list and I'm checking things off. So that speaks to the joy piece. It speaks to the now you're just moving through the motions. Corie?
What Brenna was just saying, actually, it really hit the nail on the head, I think, as well, too. It's that inability to get into flow, if that makes sense. And what you were just saying about assignments, too, is you're staring at this assignment and you're like, I understand these words, but strung together, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next, right? It's a language that I know I understand, but I don't know what to do now. And you're right, that I can see that coming out in questions a lot. You're muted.
Excellent. I was just grabbing a link in case people hadn't, if the notion of flow was new to them. Okay, so with that said, with our wine space created, but actually I don't think it is wine space. I think it's really important to be able to recognize this and speak about it in a way that allows people to name what they're going through, so that others, I have to say this to my kids all the time, if you don't name it, then people can't help you, right? They're working on body language, they're working on guessing, they're working on, the energy in the room. And so all of those things absolutely do contribute, but being able to name it. Thank you, Shannon, for stepping in and evidencing that. Yes, frustration, fair enough. Don't worry, this is recorded and it will be sent out too. So, but I'd like us to pivot a little bit. That word. It's amazing how quickly it comes into your lexicon. I'd like us to switch gears into some strategies. So what, and they could be effective strategies that you've used or you've seen used or have you had used on you to create these safe learning spaces, right? Where it's okay, because it's kind of difficult sometimes to talk about being overwhelmed when you're in a graduate program or when you're in, a corporate training workshop, or heaven forbid, a high school student say, yeah, I don't understand anything. That would first involve them talking to the teacher. So in these safe spaces, what does engagement look like now? What are some innovative or maybe just tried and true methods that you've seen used, that you've seen help students as they move, try to move from that overwhelmedness of always being online, always learning online to okay, I'm curious about what we're going to do today here. And I just happen to be in this online space to do it, but I'm still curious. I'm excited and engaged.
I can start. So for me, we've talked about this already. We've talked about space. And for me, it's very, very, very important. Probably more important than a lot of people, but for me, space and where I am and where I've situated myself and what I look at and the feel of the room I'm in is hugely impacts how well I do and how much I stay engaged. So if I don't want to enter that room and sit in there for a couple hours, I'm not going to do well. So even at my work office, I decorate, and it's funny because I love art, but there's not an artistic bone in my body. Like I can't paint, can't draw, nothing, but I love art. So I surround myself in art and I surround myself with things that might inspire me. You guys can't see, you can only see behind me, but in front of me, there's, I'm in an alcove and it's literally a collage of just things I've put on the wall, and it goes all the way up to the ceiling, all the way down. And it's just a mess for some people, but for me, it's very grounding to feel empowered where I'm working. So I always encourage students, we always talk about, make a dedicated space and have your equipment, your tools that you need. But I think we miss talking about make that space lovable, make it a space that you really feel is you, and that you can feel like you want to enter, and that you're not going to be triggered by it after you finish doing 2 years of a master's program online and never want to enter that room again. You want to be able to still access that space. So, oh, thank you. I just think that we don't talk about it enough. We talk about having the tools around, but we don't talk about having beauty around you when you're learning online. So kind of broke up for me, it's a preventative, but there's also combative pieces too, right? So there's preventative pieces to becoming burnt out, like making your space beautiful, sleep hygiene. We all know about that, drinking water, all those things we all know about already, under the umbrella of the word that now is almost becoming kind of yucky is self-care. I know that it's the word we need to use, but sometimes I feel like we're hearing it a lot. But we all know about the self-care piece, but so those are all the preventative pieces, but then the combative strategies that I use on a regular basis and that I kind of recommend to my students are the big ones, like 20-20-20 rule. So I'll post something in the chat about that, because I think that that's a good one to incorporate in your daily, and if you're teaching and if you have students in front of you, and if you don't know what that is, it's every 20 minutes when you're online staring at a screen, every 20 minutes, set a timer if you need to, you look up away for at least 20 feet. So if you have a window, it's great. If you don't, open your door and have something for 20 seconds. So every 20 minutes, 20 feet away for 20 seconds. So I often tell students to pick a focal point and put something weird there or funny or something that's just going to make them chuckle when they look over there. And we time it. I go, okay, our 20 minutes, our 20/20 time. And we all look up and look away. And sometimes we laugh. Sometimes people get distracted, but that's okay, right? So that's kind of one of my combative things, going outside. Even if it's just to sit on your porch, even if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's a thunderstorm, even better if it's a thunderstorm, because those are great. But for me, okay, and this is my biggest strategy, and it's combative, is caring for something that's alive. Now that can be plants, that can be animals, that can be your spouse, that can be your kids. But even if it's just a small act of, for me, wiping the leaves of my plants so they're shiny, giving my cat treats, playing a video game with my kid for 20 minutes, or offering a bowl of ice cream to my husband, something that denotes that you're caring for something else alive, it just combats a lot of that stress and that fatigue that we feel with just constantly being out there and online. So yeah, that's for me kind of what I use in my day-to-day. But I welcome to hear all sorts of other ones, because I always need more.
Thank you, Sandra. And it's so true. I think, especially working, in that K-12 age range, right? There'll be many different things, and of course, lots of inequities in terms of background and ability to be in places. But there are some things they can control, right? And so there's some great work around with the Big Life Journal folks in K-12 and growth mindset around what are things that you can control in your space, in the noise.
Absolutely.
And get them into their senses, right? What can control about the smell or about the taste? Is there a smell that really is uplifting for you? Great. That's a wonderful key to find, so that you can have that handy, that just kind of, okay, takes you out of the screen.
Yes.
And into your body. Even if it's just for 10 or 30 seconds, that's all your brain needs to just have a little reset. Brenna, how about you? Where do you see some, you get to work with faculty across a very big institution. So what types of strategies are you seeing them use? Oh, yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it comes actually back to what you've both been talking about control. And I talk to faculty a lot about agency and choice, and giving students agency and choice over their learning, because, this is not the context that I work in, but my son started kindergarten this year, and it's been up and down. It's been an up and down period of time. But one of the things that I'm really recognizing in him is that he is, he was in full day daycare, and I figured full day daycare to kindergarten, not so big a deal, except that full day kindergarten is like, choose your own adventure, do what you want to do, play-based learning, you control your time, right? And kindergarten is not. There's a structure and a regimen, and I'm really seeing in him how difficult it is to transition to having total control over his time, to having ultimately very little. And all the things he's doing are fun and he's enjoying them, but he comes home at the end of the day, he's exhausted and he wants to control everything at home. And so, because he teaches me a lot, I've been thinking about this a lot in relation to my faculty, and why we talk so much about agency and choice for learners. And, it can be small things like offering a podcast version of a video, so that a student who is really just at the end of the rope with sitting in front of the computer can pop earbuds in and go for a stroll and listen to the audio of the lecture component. That's an example. It can be big things like giving students agency and choice over which assignments they do and when they do them, right? But allowing students to make decisions for themselves around their learning is really, really important. And oftentimes those opportunities are just not there, right? And so then we get into what both Sandra and Elizabeth have talked about, which is creating sort of your space in a way that it feels like you have some control. I also am a big believer in decor and stuffies. Giving yourself that control aesthetically can help, but I think from a faculty support perspective, I really like to talk about the power of agency and choice in combating burnout. Because if you can decide that, I already know this week is going to be awful because of all of these other things in my personal life, maybe I can choose to not submit an assignment this week, and that's going to give me enough breathing room to make it through. I think that kind of flexibility is very, very powerful. And then the other thing that I think is really important is respecting the boundaries of the home space that online learners do set up. So, if a learner is not comfortable having their camera on, that's a choice that they're making. You don't necessarily, as the instructor or as a classmate, you don't necessarily know the background that went into that decision. Respecting it as it is. I think those kinds of choices, especially I think for campus faculty who have transitioned into online spaces, that was a real, you lose a lot of control, right? Here we come back to the idea of control again and how anxious we all are when we're out of control. But respecting the boundaries that individual learners set up about their home space and how they choose to learn, I think is really, really important.
Absolutely. And I'm smiling because I was just having a flashback to some early days of online learning where we sent out guides and, suggestions around maybe how you could set up your home space and boundaries you could have, and how it would be really great if you could have your camera on, because we know there's research behind connection and engagement. And now we're also seeing it. I think one of the lovely gifts of the pandemic is we're seeing sort of that many areas, but that one in particular, that research is becoming much more broad. And so we're getting a sense of a continuum of that, as opposed to, oh yeah, you've got to have it on for engagement, otherwise there's no engagement. And we're seeing that actually, no, that's not necessarily true anymore. But then I remember we had to send a follow-on note about, okay, so perhaps maybe not with a lot of action in the background because it's distracting, or so it's just been interesting, right? As people come into these places and spaces, how do you make them your own? One of the things that, and Corie, that I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I'll just finish this. One of the things for me that the Indigenous land acknowledgement really invites is, there's a respect there. There's protocols there for coming onto the physical land. And so I think working in this space, we have an obligation to have those spaces be created in a way that people who come after us are going to raise their hands in thanks, and in a way that allows those spaces to be this more holistic, appreciative place. And so some of what you've both been sharing so far allow the people in the spaces to co-create them, right? They're not, as much as Zoom has created this space for us, or LMS creates the bounds, what happens within there is up to the community that is in those spaces working together. Corie, what have you seen? Because now that everyone in your team is 100% at home, I'm sure they've had to navigate lots of different strategies and innovative ways to go to Paris in the background.
Sorry, my cat has just wandered in here and he's awful. Sorry. Yeah, so that's actually one of my coping things that I was just going to talk about as well, too. I think if I've read a couple of the comments correctly as well, one of the things that I've found that is really, really helpful is to normalize the taking care of your mental health, whether that is therapy or admitting that you need the space or whatever. I lived in a really crazy place as an inspector for a number of years and a trainer, where I traveled all over the place and I was really busy. One of the sort of silver linings of the pandemic and working from home has been that I've been able to drop into myself and become more self-aware, if that makes sense. And I've become more in tune with what I need, and that because I'm not traveling like a crazy person anymore, like I was before. And while I love to travel, hence I just booked my latest trip to France to go see my in-laws this morning again, and that's something to look forward to. That's a big part of my mental health as well. But the self-compassion part of it, and being aware that today this is not going to happen, and that's okay. Many years ago, a therapist introduced me to the work of Kristen Neff. If anybody's familiar with her work and self-compassion, I would strongly, I'll put the link in the chat. I would strongly encourage people to take a listen to some of the guided meditations that she's got as well on being compassionate to yourself. And the cyclical nature of women's lives and bodies as well mean that some days it's not going to happen. Today is not going to happen. And my fear was being busy all the time. My fear was that if I stop, I'll never get going again. And so being able to say, it's okay to stop right now. It's okay to sort of cocoon a little bit and to say, right now, it's okay to just slow down and back up. I can get back at it later. That's all right. And so that's whether I'm cocooning in my space physically or in my head. Either way, I think normalizing the therapy, the care for the mental health part of it has been huge for me over the last couple of years. The pandemic allowed me to do that. I don't know that I would have done this if it wasn't for that. I don't know if that's ringing a bell with anybody else either, but that's one of my effective strategies that I've found is acknowledging the need for, like I said, normalizing therapy in this case. And yes, and I was going to mention Brene Brown as well. I don't know if that was too cliche or not, but yeah, and she's back just today with her latest podcast episode as well too. So that's something that I'm looking forward to, and that's huge, is to have something to look forward to as well too. That's not work. That's not another assignment for school. That's not, yeah, it's something else, right? And on the other side of Brenna as well, my son's in grade 12 this year. And yeah, and so he started the pandemic kind of towards the second half of grade 9, and things have largely gone back to normal for him. But watching his mental health walk as well has been really interesting, because it's been completely different than mine, but difficult in a lot of ways as well too. So yeah, normalizing that discussion has been huge. Just call it out.
Yeah, thank you for that, Corie, because I think that's something that traditionally wouldn't have fallen in an instructor space necessarily, right? You would try to build that trusting, open environment, but there was sort of a line that was unstated. I mean, Brenna, you may have different experience there, but sort of a line that was definitely, and I've certainly seen over the past 3 years, that line has definitely gone a little bit murky. I'm just looking at my notes from this part of the conversation, and what I've got circled here are space, caring, agency and choice, flexibility, balance, compassion, having a purpose, something to look forward to, goal, knowing your audience, knowing who your work, so that notion of ages and stages and cycles. And I think when you look at some of those, and then I'm just going to put here, I was telling the folks on the panel earlier, this is Curtis Bonk's work from 2014 about engaging the tech variety, right? So this is back in a time when online learning, people were falling into a pattern. They were doing what the LMS allowed them to do. Not everybody, but some. And so you had discussion groups, you had posts, you maybe had some polls, and that's kind of how you engaged in these spaces. And then you had some synchronous. And other, amazing faculty and amazing educators beyond higher ed in corporate training were doing fabulous things. But there was sort of that, we've fallen into a bit of a rut. And so his book came out and said, well, listen, there's all these things. And then there was another book with 100 ways to engage your learner. But in here, one of the very first things on that website is you'll see he talks a lot about motivation and sort of breaks it down with his mnemonic. But many of the things that come up in the pieces that he flags for motivation are versions of what you have all just stated here. And so for me, I think that's one of the things that's really validating for the field, is that the things we know for engagement in these spaces have stood the test of time. And they've stood the test of time because they're the things we need as humans to feel connected, to want to contribute to community, and to work together towards a purpose. So I'm going to switch to our last question a little bit, because I think this one we could go on and on about actually, but we'll try to not make everyone listen for hours. So the way it was phrased, so I'll just read it. And it goes to that notion of community, whether the role of community and what participation looks like in online communities has changed because more people have been in these spaces. The pandemic has changed what these spaces are, and it's changed how people are going to interact. Corie's not going to the office anymore. Sandra, some of your students will always stay hybrid as K-12. Brenna, some of your faculty may never come back to campus, but they're teaching fully online, whereas previously they only taught face-to-face. So what does this new normal way of fostering online communities look like that respects this physiological realities of working all the time on a screen and just the eye fatigue and the physical fatigue, the mental impacts of being in these spaces and maybe not having that sort of movement connection with the cerebellum in our brain, which is sort of that magic editor of everything. So has this role of community changed? Are you seeing it manifest itself differently now that we're in these spaces in a much more frequent way?
I think for what I am noticing, and also because, my research took me to adolescence and mental health and online learning. That was kind of what I capped off my MLAT with. And I think what we're seeing is more an uptake of what the best practices in the face-to-face classrooms are. So we're seeing a lot of online educators and using good technology and good platforms, but also the pedagogy of social emotional learning and trauma-informed practice and mindfulness within the scope of teaching online. Whereas before that was sort of a face-to-face thing. Now I'm seeing people going, hey, wait, these are still people on the other side of the screen. Why aren't we still using those humanistic qualities that we want to see in the classroom? Then we should be using those same pedagogies when we're online as well. So I have been seeing an uptake of that, which is great. And also, a little bit, just a little story I'm going to share, because my son has just started. I don't know if any of you are aware of the Khan World School that Sal Khan has just started. So Khan from Khan Academy, Sal Khan has started what's called the Khan World School, and he has the inaugural year is this year. It's all grade 9 students from around the world. So I think there's about 100 of them, and my son is one of them. So I'm having this really brilliant opportunity to watch these kids from around the world. We're talking, there's a couple students from the Ukraine, from the Dominican Republic, from India, from China, from the United States, from Canada, all over the world learning together the curriculum, like grade 9 curriculum. And it's fascinating. They've implemented some really great seminar strategies. So he's basically communicating with these kids a couple hours a day. It's not just, modules online. They are face-to-face discussing real world problems. And I think that for me is what I see as a push towards creating a more global citizen. And online learning and internet, that's what it can do for us. It can create global citizens that are working together at a young age, solving world problems. Like, what does it get any better than that? I don't think so. So for me, that's just sort of where I see community and participation opening up for younger generations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sandra. That's, I think, it is an amazing initiative that he's undertaken. I don't know if you have a link to put in the chat. If
I do, I will. Yeah.
But I'm also going to put in, because what you touched on earlier was this notion of a pedagogy of care. Yeah. And so there's lots of discussion in the academic space as online learning and blended learning and open ed all sort of collided in the same space. And then the pandemic happened. So pre-pandemic, there was this collision, according to Elizabeth. I mean, others may disagree. And cross-pollination, right, from all of these areas. And there was a lot of work around pedagogy of care and playing out that concept, and the concept of, really as old term instructional designers at the center.
Mel nodding still stands up. Really? Yeah, she does.
It's always been the individual, right? This is a human at the other end. So, Corie, what are you seeing with respect to the role of online communities in learning, and where do you see that going?
This one is kind of a weird one for me. I spent a lot of years as either a self-employed consultant doing trades training, like I said, and I also did work in the oil and gas space for a multinational as a trainer in radiation and explosives as well. I was online for a long time. I mean, it's very, very difficult to stand up and walk down the hallway in your office to somebody who you need to talk to who's in Ghana. It just doesn't work, right? So I'm really excited that people are joining me in the online spaces, if that makes sense. I'm really excited for this. This has opened up a whole lot of doors that we're able to build these online communities now, where it's been something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and now we can do it. And that's really, really exciting. And so I'm glad that there's so much research that's being done into this. I'm glad that there's so many more people that have to be online. And like the point that I put in the chat, that as much as the pandemic was a complete and utter catastrophe for a lot of people, there are some good things that are coming out of this. There's some different communities that are being built, and I'm really excited to see where those are going to go. We're seeing it at work. We have the division that I'm working in now, we're building community. We're doing knowledge transfer between generations with people that are retiring imminently. We have to be training the new people that are coming in, and not just sort of letting them figure it out. We have to come up with structures for them so that they can learn from people who've been around for a little bit longer as well. So it's not just training in classrooms and things, it's this online sharing space. And that, I think, is where we're needing to go with learning, is not just, did you get an A, did you get a B? It's, what did you learn from it? How did you learn from it? Who did you learn from it? And those kinds of spaces. And I'm really excited to see how the Khan Academy stuff goes with what Sandra was saying, because that's huge. How we're measuring learning, how we're sharing information with each other in the next generation, I think is going to be really cool to watch.
Absolutely. And I think, traditionally when we looked at succession planning, or you looked at, what was the word of the time? Knowledge management, and there was a whole, role in organizations that would help figure that out. And I think what we're seeing that evolve to is much more of that social and more of a networked approach, not a social network, but social and a networked community-driven approach, so that there are those interconnections, especially with the generational challenges we're seeing in the workforce, and the knowledge gap that we're seeing that's predicted for the next 20 years. We need to find ways to tap into that community and extend it, right? Extend what that networked ability is to be able to connect. And what does that look like? Does it mean you come to a training session once a month? Now, in our new normal, I think that will be moving into different directions. And that's what I'm hearing you say there. And Bettina's got some in here, I know, from some of the volunteer work I do with Roots of Empathy, which is a program that brings babes into schools, and they're the teacher. They moved, and they had to change quite quickly. It's a global program, and they moved to an online experience, and their online community that they built has just taken off with the volunteers and the classroom instructors, and it's knit together schools in a way that perhaps they hadn't ever tapped into before, because they're so place bound. Brenna, how about the role of community in your work? Because you're really, in some ways, the glue between a lot of
yeah, maybe chewed up gum most days rather than glue. But yes, I'm really interested in care. I'm really interested in how care functions on an institutional level. I'm sometimes very, very cynical about how care functions on an institutional level. I'm a big believer in Pedagogies of Care. The Kate Denial essay that's linked in that on that page that Elizabeth shared, I think is a really important one, because it gets at this idea of exploring and establishing the why of your teaching and the why of how your classroom is constructed as sort of a radical act, because very often, particularly those of us who teach at the post-secondary level, we're not asked to do that. So I'm a big believer in ethics of care thinking in particular. I have watched over the last 3 years, though, as this notion of care and community has often been weaponized, I think, against people who are most at risk, most vulnerable. And so I see that, for example, if we look at ethic of care thinking, what we are really talking about is relationships and responsibilities, right? And who are you responsible to? And how do you demonstrate that you are responsible to that person? And how do you hold yourself accountable? And how do you respond to being held accountable? That's care to me. That's what care is. And, self-care is a wonderful thing, but it's also really easy to commercialize. right? So, self-care is keeping on top of your school assignments, and self-care is paying your bills, right? Those are self-care acts. But it's easier to buy a bath bomb or a piece of chocolate, right? And that's often what's sold to us. And I see that happen on the institutional level, right? When an educational administrator is happy to fund a Zoom meditation class or a Zoom yoga class. Those things are great. But what would actually demonstrate care would be, making sure all the units are staffed appropriately so that they can do the work they need to do, right? And so I think I was at the start of the pandemic super heartened by the way we all started to talk about care and how much traction Kate Denial's work got, and Nell Noddings and all these really important people who have thought through really carefully relationality and care, and how quickly that became, here's a thing you can buy, here's a thing the university can sell, here's a thing we can put in as a stopgap measure, instead of actually attending to relationships. Because community at its core is about relationality, right? And when we recognize that, it's less about self-care and more about mutual care. And I think that our online learning communities can, and in their best instances are, also about mutual care. But I think we need to be mindful about how care is, see, I knew I was going to get cynical here, but we have to be mindful about how care is sold, right? And whether or not, I'm going to link an essay that I wrote recently about institutional care, and whether or not our institutions are capable of the kind of relationality that is truly at the core of care. Oh, you're muted.
Yes. I'm seeing Sandra nod her head and others nod their head, and Corie. And I think this is a really important distinction and an important place for people to spend some time thinking. I do love and I'll say it one more time, what you've already shared about, setting up this space is a radical act, right? Making some choices about what the guidelines are for how people work in this space is a radical act. Should it just be yours to set up? Or should it be yours with your students to co-create together? What does that look like? Is that too far? Are there institutional boundaries that push against that? So I think there's so many things that could be unpacked in that I'm just thrilled that it has surfaced, because I think going forward, what I'm hearing all of you say, when I look back at my little notes, is the way to be innovative is to remember that these people on the other side of this thing are people. And so how would you like to be treated? How would you like to learn? What would be interesting and curious for you? Do you have that willingness to just try it and see if it might work in a way that's a safe fail, right? Or co-create it together so you can try it. And I'm thinking of one of our Mallet students, Chad Flynn, who threw out his entire curriculum. I mean, whoa, that's a radical act. And said, okay, we're going to co-create this together, everybody. Electrical trades 101, let's do it. That's a huge risk. But a willingness to accept that, okay, it is about mutual care. It is about together, we want to get to this point. How can we do it? And so I really appreciate you highlighting that, because I think it's a nice piece. I'm also looking at the time, and Amara has come on to show me that, hey, Elizabeth, stop wander talking. But before we sort of finish, also, anyone, if you do have questions, I know it's moving fast, but you're welcome to pop them in the chat. And I know folks are putting some links in there too, which is wonderful, because it's demonstrating this very notion of let's connect on and share these resources. But if someone, I'm going to ask our panelists this. If someone said, oh, shoot, I couldn't make it to your webinar, but I was really wanting to know what's the innovative way to not have online burnout and to keep fostering engagement. I'd love to hear your last thoughts on that. So I'm not sure who wants to jump in first, but because you might need a second to think on it.
If I had to boil it down, because I know I have a couple people in my cohort right now that said exactly that. I can't make it today. I got to work. I got my day job, that kind of stuff. I would boil it down and say humanity. It's that remembering that the person on the other side is a person. They have a life, they have a family, they have good days and bad days, and we need to support each other through this. And that, I think, is unfortunately a radical act. It ought not to be, but I think it is, to open your arms and to say, okay, this is going to get messy, but I think we can do this and we can learn a lot from it, is acknowledging that, saying it out loud, the elephant in the room. And then let's move forward together in that community, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, learning is hard, right? It's really, especially as an adult, we don't often learn a lot of new things. And so being that beginner and having a beginner's mind, or I'm thinking of Peter Vale's work on the reflective beginner. Yeah, that's tricky and uncomfortable and pokey, and it pushes all your buttons. And so you don't have to go it alone, right? And I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Sandra or Brenna, do you want to jump in with your last thoughts?
I think my last thoughts would be vulnerable, be okay with sharing a piece of yourself. I mean, you don't need to share all of yourself. There's still, private and personal, but I think it's important to be vulnerable, and I think it's important to open yourself to the community that you're learning with, or learning with, really. Even if you're the instructor or the teacher or the facilitator, you're still learning with the people that you're on the other side of that screen. And I think to share of yourself is, it helps me. So give it a try.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandra. Brenna, how about you?
I think we always want there to be like one flashy technological solution to the problems that we face. It's how ed tech people become billionaires. Not me personally, but so I've heard. And there isn't one, right? There is not a technological solution to burnout, because burnout is an intersection of pedagogies and life and humanity. There isn't an easy solution. And I think, just to piggyback on what Sandra was saying and on what Corie was saying, it's about humanity. And, Sandra said, even as the instructor, you can let people in. I think especially as the instructor, you can model vulnerability. And so, that might mean that you let your bad cat in the room and they meow, and it's fine, because it's going to happen to a student, right? It might mean that your cell phone goes off and you all have a conversation about that. It might mean that, you have to end class early because you have to pick up your kid. And I think the more that people in positions of power and authority model vulnerability, compassion, and humanity, the easier it is for the most vulnerable people in the room to do the same. And I think that's actually, it's not just a nice to have. I think it's actually a responsibility that we have to each other, especially in the post-secondary context. There's this notion that we are like these brains in jars, a la Futurama, and we don't have bodies, but all learning is embodied. And so it's a lesson that I learned in the pandemic for sure. And I hope it's one, I know a lot of people did, and I hope it's something that we continue to recognize, that sharing our humanity with each other is sort of at the core of building community.
Oh, what a beautiful way to wrap up. And I think if I would offer one last piece, it actually isn't my words at all. It's Bhutanese, and it's basically, they talk a lot about hurry slowly. And I often come across that in my day when I'm feeling like I have my long list and 17 things that didn't get done and things are going sideways. And so that just being reminded to hurry slowly. This isn't a race. And in order to do your best work, what you feel is your best work, not someone else, you need to take time. Good things take time. And so thank you, all of you, for giving your time today. Those who listened in, thank you so much. The resources that have been shared are phenomenal. I can't wait to go diving into some of those links, but I'm going to turn it back over to Ramara and let her wrap us up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. What an incredible session. I have been jotting things down, and I have a really long reading list now, in a good way, not a to-do list. I'm going to hurry slowly through it. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists. This has been incredible. I will be sharing a follow-up email with all the resources and a recording. Feel welcome to share it far and wide. So forward that email. The recording is going to be public on our YouTube. So share it to anybody who you think is experiencing online burnout. So basically your whole network, and just share it widely. And we do have a few more episodes coming up in our series. So stay tuned for an invitation to attend. And thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day today, and take care of yourself.
Thank you, Amara, for sowing the seed for this concept for this one. I think it was a really excellent idea. So thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.